The apartment on Hollow Street. The first time Jenna heard the knocking, she dismissed it. Just the pipes, she thought. Old buildings had their quirks, and the apartment on Hollow Street was certainly old. It had been a spacious one-bedroom unit in a historic district for half the market price. The landlord had been eager to sign her on, almost desperate, but she didn't ask questions. At the time, she had been too excited to care. It started with the knocking, always at 3:13 a.m., a rhythmic tap, tap, tap on the wall behind her headboard. Then silence. It didn't happen every night, but often enough that it began to unsettle her. One night she knocked back. The moment her knuckles left the wall, a response came. 3 taps, louder than before. Jenna froze, every hair on her body standing on end. Her mind raced for a logical explanation. A neighbor, maybe? But she had met the only tenant on her floor, a middle-aged man who worked nights and barely spoke to her. He had even mentioned in passing that no one had lived in her apartment for years. That night, Jenna barely slept. The next morning she examined the wall. It was solid, with no adjoining unit on the other side. She reasoned it could be pipes after all, though something inside her whispered otherwise. Days passed, and the knocking continued. Then came the shadows, dark shapes that flitted past the corners of her vision, disappearing when she turned her head. Once, as she brushed her teeth, she saw something in the mirror, a shadowy figure standing just behind her shoulder. She spun around, but the bathroom was empty. Jenna told herself she was imagining things, stress from work, exhaustion, but she couldn't ignore the growing unease curling in her stomach every time she stepped inside her apartment. Then she found the notes. They appeared in odd places, slipped beneath the front door, tucked inside drawers she hadn't opened in days. The messages were always scrawled in a jagged, desperate hand. "Get out, it sees you. Don't open the closet." Her blood turned to ice. Someone was messing with her. Someone was inside her apartment. She changed the locks. It didn't help. That night, she dreamt of something standing at the foot of her bed, a tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched too wide. It whispered her name over and over, its voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. When she jolted awake, her bedroom door was open. Jenna didn't remember leaving it open. Desperate, she called her landlord, demanding answers. He sighed heavily before relenting. "There's a reason the rent is low," he admitted. "The last tenant, she didn't make it." Jenna's stomach twisted. "What happened?" "She started seeing things," he said, "hearing voices. Then one night she locked herself inside the apartment. No one saw her for weeks. When they broke the door down." He trailed off, but Jenna didn't need to hear the rest. She decided to leave. She didn't care about breaking the lease, didn't care about losing her deposit. That night she packed a bag, determined to sleep elsewhere and return in the morning for the rest of her things. At exactly 3:13 a.m., she awoke to the sound of knocking. It wasn't on the wall this time. It was coming from inside the closet. Jenna stared at the door, heart pounding. The notes had warned her, "Don't open the closet." The knocking grew more frantic. Then a voice, hoarse, pleading. "Help me." Jenna's breath hitched. It sounded human. Trapped. She hesitated. If someone was inside, they needed help. Maybe the last tenant. Maybe she never left. Hands shaking, she reached for the doorknob. The moment she touched it, the door burst open with an ear-splitting screech. A force slammed into her, throwing her across the room. Darkness swarmed her vision as something crawled out of the closet. Something wrong. It had too many limbs, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its mouth was open, whispering her name in 1,000 voices. Jenna screamed. The last thing she saw before everything went black was its hollow, endless eyes. The next morning, the landlord received a complaint. The middle-aged tenant across the hall had heard screaming from Jenna's apartment, but when the landlord unlocked the door, the unit was empty. Jenna's packed bag sat on the floor, her phone, her keys. Everything was still there. But Jenna was gone. The only thing left was the closet door, wide open, and on the inside, scrawled in blood-red letters, "It took her." Weeks passed and the apartment remained untouched. The landlord attempted to lease it again, lowering the price even further, but no one would stay more than a night. Tenants reported cold whispers in their ears, objects moving on their own, and always, the knocking at 3:13 a.m. One night, a group of college students dared each other to stay inside. They brought cameras, determined to capture proof of the supernatural. The footage was never recovered, but neighbors heard their screams, followed by silence. The police found the apartment empty, but a single note laid on the floor, scrawled in frantic handwriting. It took them. The apartment on Hollow Street remains vacant, waiting for the next tenant.